The rancher was in the middle of his routine, the sun barely peeking through the trees, and the day already heavy with the weight of the fields. The air was thick with the scent of earth and the faint sound of distant cattle. He was moving between the hay bales, his hands rough and calloused from years of labor, when he saw her stumbling through the brush, disheveled and covered in dirt. A young girl, no older than 15, with eyes wide and frantic. She staggered toward him, her mouth parched and her body trembling. The rancher paused, his instincts telling him to turn away, but something in her gaze kept him rooted to the spot. "Please," she croaked, her voice barely audible. "I need food. I'm starving." The rancher looked at her, unsure of what to do. He was a simple man, accustomed to hard work and a quiet, isolated life. Strangers didn't often make their way to his ranch, and the few who did were usually men from the nearby town, with nothing more than business in mind. This girl, however, was different. She was no traveler, not by the looks of it. Her clothes were torn, and her face was streaked with dirt, making her appear as though she'd wandered through a storm. His hesitation was brief, but it felt like an eternity. He had little to spare, and taking a chance on a stranger wasn't something he was known to do. Still, his gut told him to act. He nodded and motioned for her to follow. She sat at the wooden table inside his cabin, her hands shaking as she clutched the bowl of stew he had prepared for her. He watched her eat, every spoonful devoured with an urgency that seemed unnatural. As she finished, the girl wiped her mouth, the empty bowl still trembling in her hands. She didn't meet his eyes. Instead, staring into the fire burning low in the hearth, the rancher cleared his throat, the awkwardness of the situation settling between them. "You must have been wondering for a while," he said, trying to make conversation. She nodded but said nothing, as if the words were stuck somewhere deep inside her. Finally, she lifted her head, her eyes locking with his, intense and unblinking. The rancher felt a chill run down his spine, as if the very air around them had thickened. Without warning, she spoke words that he didn't understand, an ancient tongue that carried with it a sense of weight, as if they were not meant for him. "Your kindness," she said softly, "has awakened something that must be protected." The rancher leaned forward, confused and intrigued by her words. She didn't seem afraid, but there was an intensity in her voice that made him uneasy. He had no idea what she meant, but something in her tone made him believe she wasn't just talking about food. The girl stood suddenly, her movements swift and precise. She turned toward the door, and before the rancher could react, she was outside. Disappearing into the night, he stood frozen in the doorway, watching the shadowy outline of her figure slip away, the night swallowing her whole. For a moment he thought he had imagined it all, the girl, her words, the strange energy that seemed to hang in the air. But something inside him, something deep and instinctual, told him it wasn't over. He stood in the doorway long after she was gone, his eyes scanning the darkened horizon, unsettled by the strange sense of foreboding that had taken root in his heart. Minutes passed, then hours. The rancher finally stepped back inside, closing the door behind him with a sigh. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling that something had changed, something had shifted. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows across the room, and for the first time in years, the silence felt unsettling. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the encounter. The girl, her strange words, the urgency in her eyes, it all felt like a warning, though he couldn't decipher what it was warning him about. But as he sat down to try and collect his thoughts, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, a sharp knock on the door echoing through the quiet cabin. His heart skipped a beat, and he rose cautiously. Could it be her? Or was it something else entirely? As he reached for the door handle, he hesitated, uncertainty filling his chest. The night outside seemed darker now, as if the very world had turned against him. His hand hovered over the door, but before he could open it, a voice echoed from the darkness, a voice he recognized, but could not place. "Help me," the voice whispered. The rancher's breath caught in his throat, and the door remained shut, locked in place by a fear he couldn't explain. Oh, ChatGPT's, the rancher had just finished his evening chores when the message arrived. It was tucked under his cabin door, folded neatly with no sign of who had left it. He felt an uneasy knot tighten in his stomach as he unfolded the paper. The ink was fresh, the words written in a hurried hand. "You helped someone you should not have." His heart skipped a beat. The words echoed in his mind, stirring up a sense of dread he couldn't shake. He had helped the girl out of kindness, out of compassion, but now he wondered if that had been a mistake. The cryptic message hinted at something far more ominous than he could grasp. Who had sent it, and why? And more importantly, what consequences? What awaited him? He stared at the paper for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing. The girl's strange words, her unsettling presence, suddenly took on new meaning. Had he unwittingly become part of something larger, something dangerous? He had no answers, only questions, and a nagging feeling that he was standing at the edge of a precipice. The night was eerily quiet, the wind barely stirring, yet the message weighed heavily on his shoulders. He could almost feel eyes watching him, though he could see no one. Was it a warning, a threat, or something even more sinister? The rancher couldn't decide, but he knew one thing for certain: something was coming, and he had no idea how to prepare for it. The days passed in a haze, each one blending into the next. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that his every move was being observed. His work on the ranch became mechanical, his thoughts constantly drifting back to the girl and the mysterious note. The town was quiet, too quiet, as if everyone knew something he didn't. The rancher found himself avoiding eye contact with the few people who still passed through. No one seemed to acknowledge him, but the tension in the air was palpable, and he felt the weight of it like a storm on the horizon. The unease that had settled deep within him only grew with time, and he couldn't escape the feeling that he was about to be caught up in something he couldn't control. Late one evening, as the sky turned a dusky purple, a figure appeared on the horizon. The rancher, who had been working late in the barn, glanced up to see a silhouette approaching. It wasn't a man from the town. This figure was too far off, too deliberate in its movements. The rancher's pulse quickened, and his breath hitched in his chest. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, but curiosity held him in place. As the figure grew closer, he could make out details: broad shoulders, a worn coat, and the steady pace of someone with a purpose. The figure reached the ranch gate and paused, staring at him through the darkness. The rancher's mind raced. Who was this, and why were they here? The stranger spoke, his voice low and deliberate, carrying a weight that made the rancher's skin crawl. You've stirred something by helping her. The rancher's stomach twisted. Who are you? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though it trembled at the edges. The man didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning the surroundings before settling back on the rancher. It's not just about you anymore, he said. Things have already started moving. You're caught in a web now, whether you realize it or not. The rancher's mind spun, but his instincts told him to listen. Something was unfolding, and he didn't fully understand it, but he had no choice but to hear this man out. The stranger continued, explaining cryptic details about ancient forces at play and old pacts that had been forgotten by time. The girl you fed, he said, she's a key, not just to survival, but to a larger balance. You've been marked, whether you like it or not. The rancher listened intently, though the words made little sense to him. Marked for what? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger's eyes gleamed, almost knowingly, as he answered, that's for you to discover. But no, there's no turning back now. The tension in the air thickened, the weight of the stranger's words hanging like a dark cloud over the rancher. He realized then that his life had irrevocably changed, and the path ahead was unknown, dangerous, and fraught with uncertainty. The man paused, as if weighing his next words carefully, then gave a slight nod. There are those who will come for you, people who know what you've done. You'll have to decide if you're going to face it or run. The rancher felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Why me? He asked, still struggling to understand how this all related to him. The stranger's face remained unreadable, and for a moment, the rancher thought he saw a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, or regret pass through his eyes. Because you chose to help when you didn't have to, the stranger said, his voice low and almost sorrowful. That choice will haunt you, but it also makes you vital to what's coming. With that, the stranger turned, vanishing into the night as quickly as he had arrived, leaving the rancher standing in stunned silence, his thoughts tangled in the web of mystery and danger now closing in on him. In the days that followed, the rancher could do nothing but wait and prepare, though he still didn't know what he was preparing for. The stranger's warning echoed in his mind. Things have already started moving. He knew the message wasn't just a threat, it was a reality he could no longer ignore. Something dark and ancient was stirring, and he had unwittingly become a part of it, but with no answers, and the silence of the night growing heavier by the hour. The rancher found himself questioning his every decision. Had he made the right choice in helping the girl? And if he had, what was to come next? The mystery was far from over, and the rancher was beginning to realize that the truth would be far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The next morning, as the rancher was tending to his animals, he noticed a figure in the distance, a man walking slowly toward the village. The man moved with purpose, his face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat and a cloak that billowed in the wind. His presence seemed out of place in the quiet, dusty roads of the village. The rancher couldn't help but notice the unusual calmness in his demeanor, as if he was used to walking through lands far less familiar than these. When the man reached the village square, his eyes scanned the area, and then, with surprising certainty, he made his way straight to the rancher's cabin. The man stopped at the rancher's gate, his gaze intense. You are the one who helped her, aren't you? He asked, his voice smooth and steady, though it carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. The rancher hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had only helped the girl, fed her, and offered her shelter. Why would anyone be looking for her? I don't know who you mean, the rancher replied cautiously, his mind racing. But the man's unwavering gaze told him he was lying. You know exactly who I mean, he said with a soft, almost predatory smile. She came to you, and now I need information. Without waiting for a reply, the man pulled out a small pouch from beneath his cloak and extended it toward the rancher. The pouch jingled with the sound of coins, the offer clear. This is for your trouble, he said, his tone calm but commanding. The rancher stared at the pouch, the glint of gold catching his eye. It was more than enough to cover months of hard work, but the rancher wasn't swayed by money. Something about the situation felt wrong, like a trap he couldn't yet see. The stranger's eyes never left him, and the rancher knew that whatever was happening, it wasn't about the money. It was about the girl and about him. "I don't know where she's gone," the rancher said, his voice steady, though doubt flickered in his chest. "She just showed up, and I helped her. That's all." The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly, though he maintained his composed exterior. "You think you're just a bystander in this? You think it's as simple as that?" he asked, his voice laced with a quiet intensity. The rancher shifted uncomfortably, but he held his ground. "It's nothing more than I said," he replied, a hint of finality in his tone. The stranger studied him for a moment longer, his expression unreadable, before slowly nodding. "Very well," he murmured, his voice softening. "But know this, you've involved yourself in something far bigger than you realize." As the mysterious man turned and began walking away, the rancher felt a chill creep down his spine. The encounter left him with more questions than answers. Who was this man? Why was he so intent on finding the girl? And what did all of this mean for him? The rancher tried to shake off the feeling of dread, but it lingered like a shadow, following him through the rest of his day. He had a strange sense that his life was no longer his own, that whatever path he had unwittingly stepped onto, he could not escape from it. That night, as the rancher sat by his fire, the mystery of the girl continued to gnaw at him. Why had she come to him? And why had the man been so desperate for information? The questions swirled in his mind, each answer slipping further out of reach. As he stared into the flickering flames, he thought about what the stranger had said. "You've involved yourself in something far bigger than you realize." It was a warning, but a warning for what? He couldn't shake the feeling that the girl's appearance wasn't a coincidence, that there was something significant about her, something beyond her being just another wanderer in need. The rancher decided to go to bed early that night, hoping that sleep might bring him some clarity. But as he lay in the darkness, his mind wouldn't quiet. Every sound in the night seemed amplified, every rustle of wind or shift of the animals making him tense. He knew he couldn't ignore what was happening, but he also didn't know how to face it. For the first time in his life, he felt small in the face of something far larger than his ranch, larger than his understanding. There were forces at play that he couldn't control, and he didn't even know which way to turn the next morning. Despite his best efforts to move on, the rancher couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The stranger's warning still echoed in his mind, and now he wondered if he was already too deep into something he could never get out of. As he walked to the barn, he spotted a figure standing at the edge of his property, another stranger, this one with a weathered face and eyes full of hard knowledge. The rancher froze for a moment, a knot forming in his stomach. His life, his quiet existence, was slipping through his fingers, and the more he tried to understand it, the more he realized there was no turning back. He was caught in something much darker, and the girl had been just the beginning. The night was still, a calm that seemed unnatural. The rancher had been asleep for only a few hours when a noise broke through the silence, a low rumble in the distance, like thunder rolling over the plains. He awoke with a start, heart racing as he glanced at the window. The wind had shifted, and the darkness outside seemed thicker than before, pressing in on the cabin. He strained to hear, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The sound grew louder, now unmistakable. Footsteps, many of them, and they were closing in fast. The rancher grabbed his rifle and hurried to the door, his mind racing. Who could be out there in the dead of night? His thoughts raced to the mysterious stranger, to the girl and to the warning that had haunted him for days. He stepped outside, cautiously, squinting into the darkness, but the shadows were too thick to see anything. Then, as if summoned by his thoughts, there appeared silent figures emerging from the night like ghosts. The rancher froze. There were hundreds of them, silent, swift, and organized. Warriors, native men and women, dressed in furs and leather, their faces painted with symbols he did not understand. They moved with a fluidity that seemed almost supernatural, their presence like a wave crashing upon the shore. They didn't speak, didn't shout. They just arrived, as though they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The rancher's mind raced, a feeling of dread creeping over him as he realized they weren't here for a friendly visit. The warriors spread out around the ranch, surrounding the small cabin with eerie precision. The rancher's grip on his rifle tightened, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea who they were or what they wanted, but the air felt charged, like the stillness before a storm. The tension was thick, and though they hadn't made a move toward him, he could feel their eyes on him, eyes that knew something he didn't. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. These weren't just ordinary travelers, these were people of power, and he was utterly unprepared for what was happening. From the mass of figures, one man stepped forward, older, his long hair streaked with gray, his skin weathered and lined with age. He moved with authority. The rancher could feel the weight of the man's presence even from a distance. The elder stopped a few paces away, his eyes locking with the rancher's. For a long moment, Neither of them spoke, and the rancher felt a shiver run down his spine. The silence was oppressive, as though the world itself had paused in anticipation. Then, the elder spoke, his voice deep and steady, yet it carried an undeniable power. "You fed our sister," he said, each word hanging in the air like a judgment, "and that has consequences." The rancher swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had only fed the girl, given her shelter for a night. What consequences could possibly come from that? But the elder's words were clear, and the weight behind them was undeniable. The warriors around them remained perfectly still, their expressions unreadable, their eyes fixed on him as if waiting for his response. The rancher didn't know what to say. He had expected many things, a thanks, an accusation, maybe even a confrontation, but this felt different. He was caught in something larger than he could comprehend, and the girl's mysterious presence was at the heart of it. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach as the elder's gaze never wavered. For a long moment, the rancher stood frozen, his rifle hanging loosely in his hands. He could feel the weight of their eyes upon him, as though every warrior present was silently assessing him. The elder didn't speak again, instead simply watching the rancher with a gaze that seemed to pierce through him, as if he could see the man's very soul. The tension in the air grew unbearable, and for the first time, the rancher felt small, insignificant in the face of something ancient and powerful. He had been dragged into a world far beyond his understanding, and every instinct told him to turn away, to run, but he stood his ground. There was no escape now. Finally, the elder took a step back, signaling to the warriors. Without a word, they began to disperse, vanishing back into the darkness from which they had emerged. The rancher stood there for a long time after they left, still gripped by the tension and fear they had left in their wake. His mind was racing. What had just happened? Who were they and why had they come? The elder's warning echoed in his mind, a ghost that refused to fade. "You fed our sister, and that has consequences." He had helped her out of kindness, out of a desire to do what was right. But now he was left wondering if he had made the worst mistake of his life. The rancher couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in that brief moment. The night had shifted, the air thick with the promise of something more. He had no answers, no understanding of what had just transpired, but he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. The girl's mysterious appearance, the warrior's arrival, it was all part of something bigger, something dangerous, and he was right in the middle of it, unable to escape, unable to understand. The tension in the air lingered long after they were gone, and for the first time in his life, the rancher felt like a pawn in a game he didn't even know. The rules of Dot. The following evening, after the warriors had left the ranch, the rancher found himself alone with his thoughts, unable to shake the sense of dread that had settled in his chest. The words of the elder echoed in his mind. "You fed our sister, and that has consequences." He tried to focus on his chores, hoping that by keeping busy, he could push away the unease that had taken root in his heart. But when the sun dipped below the horizon, the silence of the night was broken once more. The warriors had returned, and this time, they weren't leaving. They encircled his cabin once again, their presence more imposing than before. The rancher's breath quickened as he felt the weight of their eyes upon him. The leader, the elder, from the previous night, stepped forward once again, his expression unreadable. "We have come to take you with us," the elder said, his voice commanding but not unkind. "It is time for you to fulfill the obligation you have created by helping our sister. The ritual must be completed." The rancher's heart skipped a beat. A ritual? He had no idea what they were talking about. He had simply fed the girl and given her shelter. This wasn't a favor, it was kindness, nothing more. But now it seemed like the very act of helping her had bound him to something much darker, something that he couldn't escape. He opened his mouth to protest, but the elder's steady gaze silenced him. "There is no choice," the elder said. "You must come with us." The rancher's thoughts were racing, his instincts screaming at him to run, to hide. He had no idea what this ritual was, but the more he considered the situation, the more he realized he had no choice but to follow. If he refused, he was sure that the warriors would not let him go. With a heavy heart, he nodded, putting his rifle down and stepping into the night. The warriors moved as one, their faces hidden by shadows, and the rancher found himself walking behind them, heading toward the forest. The air felt thick with tension, each step he took feeling heavier than the last. He had no idea where they were taking him or what awaited him, but he couldn't escape now. He had already stepped too far into their world. The deeper they moved, into the forest, the more surreal everything seemed. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches reaching toward the sky, thick with age and secrets. The moon cast an eerie light, filtering through the canopy above, giving the entire forest an otherworldly glow. The further they walked, the more distant the ranch and the world he knew seemed. He could feel the pulse of the forest around him, a low hum in the air that seemed to resonate with the earth itself. It was as though the forest was alive, watching, waiting. The warriors led him without speaking, their pace unwavering. Each step was deliberate, as though they had walked this path 1,000 times before. And the rancher couldn't shake the feeling that he was merely a visitor in a place where he did not belong. They finally arrived at a clearing, and the rancher's breath caught in his throat. Before him stood an altar, ancient and weathered, the stones cracked and covered in moss. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the remnants of an old fire. The altar seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as though it was still, alive with memories of the past. Around the altar, several warriors stood in a circle, their faces hidden in the shadows. The rancher felt a chill run down his spine, his feet frozen to the ground. He could sense the weight of history in this place, a history that was far beyond his understanding. What was this ritual? What did it all mean? His instinct screamed at him to run, to turn around and escape, but his feet refused to move. As the elder began chanting, his voice deep and resonant, the air around the rancher seemed to shift. The ancient language felt heavy in the stillness of the forest, echoing through the trees like the whispers of the past. The flames of the small fire flickered wildly, casting strange shadows on the altar. The rancher stood frozen, his body tense, feeling the weight of the ritual pressing down on him. It was as though the very earth beneath his feet was pulsing, responding to the elder's words. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, the world around him seemed to dissolve into darkness. He blinked, trying to clear his head, but the sensation only intensified. Something was happening to him, something he couldn't control. Then, without warning, the visions began. The rancher's breath caught in his throat as the forest around him seemed to disappear, replaced by images of a distant, time-ancient battles fought under a blood-red sky. He could see warriors, their faces grim, charging into the fray. The sound of clashing swords and the cries of battle filled his ears, though his body remained motionless. He watched as men and women, dressed in furs and armor, fought fiercely against a seemingly endless enemy. But among the warriors, one figure stood out, a man betrayed by his closest allies, his face twisted in rage and despair as he fell, his blood staining the earth beneath him. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of the images as quickly as it began. The vision shifted now. The rancher saw a different scene, a village, burning under the light of a full moon. The flames leaped high into the sky, casting long, ominous shadows. He could see a woman standing at the center of the chaos, her face obscured by a veil of smoke and ash. She raised her hands, as if summoning the fire, as the warriors around her fell to their knees in reverence. But there was a look of sorrow in her eyes, one of regret and loss, as though she were bound to this destruction by forces beyond her control. The rancher's mind raced. What was the connection between these images and the girl who had appeared on his doorstep? Was she part of this ancient struggle? The visions continued, growing more intense with each passing moment. The rancher could see the same woman, now older, standing before a large stone altar, much like the one in front of him. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and the ground around her seemed to crack and shift, as though the very earth was responding to her power. He saw the same betrayal, the same desperate cries. But now there was a twist. The woman, once a healer and protector, had become something darker, something twisted by the forces she had called upon. The rancher felt a deep unease settle within him as he began to understand. This ritual wasn't just about thanks, it was part of a cycle, a pattern of power, betrayal, and sacrifice that had been playing out for centuries. The elders' chanting grew louder, more insistent, as the rancher was pulled deeper into the vision. He could no longer tell where the ritual ended and the past began. The boundaries between time and space seemed to blur. He saw a great stone structure, ancient and weathered, rising from the ground like a monument to the past. Inside he saw rows of people, warriors, leaders, and elders, each bound to the stone, their faces twisted in agony. Their eyes were wide with fear, and their mouths were open in silent screams. The rancher realized, with a sinking feeling, that these were the same warriors who had come to his ranch. They were part of a forgotten lineage, trapped in a cycle of ritual and bloodshed. And now, he was part of it too. As the images flashed before his eyes, the rancher began to piece together the truth. The girl was not just a wanderer, she was a key part of an ancient bloodline tied to the power of the land itself. The ritual he was part of wasn't just a gesture of thanks, it was a binding, a ritual that had been performed for centuries to keep the power of this bloodline alive. The girl's appearance, his role in helping her, was no coincidence. He had been chosen, not because of his kindness, but because he had unwittingly stepped into a cycle that had been predestined. The power that flowed through the girl was ancient, and it had the potential to change everything. But it came at a cost, and now, he was bound to it whether he liked it or not. As the final vision unfolded, the rancher saw the woman once more, this time standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a vast turbulent ocean. Her eyes were full of sorrow and regret, and as the rancher watched, he saw her take a step forward, as if she were ready to plunge into the depths below. But before she could fall, she turned, her eyes locking with his. "You must choose," she whispered, her voice echoing in his mind. "The cycle can be broken, but it requires a great sacrifice. The question is, are you willing to pay the price?" The vision shattered in an instant, and the rancher was thrust back into the present, gasping for air. He stood on trembling legs, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. The ritual had ended, but the questions remained. What had he just seen, and what did it mean for him and the girl moving forward? At the break of dawn, the forest was still, but the air was thick with anticipation. The warriors had gathered, once again in the clearing, the same circle of silent figures standing like statues around the ancient altar. The rancher, still reeling from the visions he had witnessed the night before, barely had time to collect himself before the elders stepped forward. His expression was grave, yet there was a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. With a slow, deliberate motion, the elder reached into his cloak and pulled out an object wrapped in dark cloth. As he unfurled it, the rancher's breath caught in his throat. It was an amulet, ancient and intricate, glowing faintly with an inner light. The air seemed to hum around it. This, the elder said, his voice heavy with reverence, is the sacred gift. It is a token of power, of an ancient lineage that binds us all. You have been chosen to protect it. The rancher's heart raced as the elder handed the amulet to him. It was heavier than it looked, and the cool metal seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. He felt a strange compulsion to hold it, as though it were pulling him in. But as he took the amulet in his hands, a wave of unease washed over him. He had no idea what he was holding, only that it felt wrong, like something that didn't belong in his hands. But the elder's words left no room for question. You must guard it with your life, the elder continued, his eyes never leaving the rancher. It is tied to everything, our past, our future. The forces that seek it are powerful, and they will stop at nothing to claim it. You have been chosen, not by chance, but by the ancient ones. The rancher's mind spun. Chosen for what? He had simply helped the girl, fed her when she was hungry. He hadn't asked for any of this. But now, standing here with the amulet in his hands, he felt the weight of responsibility settling upon him. His life had changed in a way he couldn't comprehend, and there was no turning back. The warriors stood in silence, their faces shadowed in the dim light of morning, their eyes never leaving him. The air was charged with something he couldn't quite identify, fear, reverence, or perhaps something darker. He didn't know, but he could feel the tension, thick and palpable, pressing in around him. As the elder stepped back, the rancher was left alone with the amulet, his mind racing. What was its true purpose? Why had it been entrusted to him? And what dangers lay ahead for him now that he was its keeper? The amulet seemed to hum in his hands, its power undeniable, and yet, the more he held it, the more the rancher felt like he was unraveling something he wasn't meant to understand. As the day wore on, the rancher couldn't escape the growing sense of dread. He walked through the land that he had always known, but now, nothing felt familiar. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper. Every sound, every movement, made him tense, as if the land itself were watching him. The amulet, now hanging from a chain around his neck, felt heavier with each passing minute. Its presence was suffocating, pulling him into a web of mystery he wasn't sure he could escape. He tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, but it only intensified. There was something ancient about the amulets, something that tied it to forces far beyond his comprehension. That night, as he sat alone by the fire, the rancher couldn't shake the image of the amulet from his mind. It seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, almost as though it had a life of its own. He reached out to touch it, and as his fingers brushed against the cold metal, a vision flashed before his eyes. The same ancient battle, the same betrayal. He saw the woman once again, but this time, she was holding the amulet, her eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to resonate with the rancher's soul. She whispered something to him, her words a riddle that he couldn't understand. The darkness comes for what is ours. The bloodline will awaken, and the price will be paid. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving the rancher gasping for breath. He sat there for a long time, staring into the fire, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The amulet was tied to something ancient, something dark. It was no ordinary trinket. It was a key, a symbol of power, and a reminder of a history he was only beginning to understand. The rancher didn't know what to do next. The elder had warned him, but the true nature of the amulet was still a mystery. It was clear now that it wasn't just a symbol of gratitude. It was a relic, one that had been passed down through generations, and one that held the power to change everything. But who would come for it? And what would they do to him when they did? As the night deepened, the rancher's thoughts turned to the girl, the one who had led him to this moment. What role did she play in all of this? Why had she appeared at his doorstep, hungry and afraid, only to leave him with a burden he couldn't understand? The amulet, it seemed, was the key to everything. But what was it that the elder had said? It is tied to everything, our past, our future. The rancher shivered at the thought. The amulet wasn't just a piece of metal, it was part of something far more dangerous, something he wasn't sure he could survive. The mystery was growing, and as he looked out into the dark forest, the rancher knew that his life would never be the same again. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the impending storm that was gathering. The forces that sought the amulet were closing in, and the rancher was caught in the middle of a battle that had been fought long before he ever set foot on this land. The girl, the warriors, the amulet, all of it was connected, a web of destiny that was pulling him deeper into a past he didn't understand. The rancher stood up slowly, his hand resting on the amulet, and for the first time since this all began, he wondered if he was strong enough to face what was coming. The rancher had always prided himself on his keen sense of awareness. He knew his land like the back of his hand, every creak of the wood, every shift of the earth. But lately, something had changed. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It started subtly, with figures appearing at the edge of his field, always just out of clear sight. At first, he brushed it off as the effects of stress or his overactive imagination. But as the days went on, the presence became impossible to ignore. He saw them more clearly now, strangers standing at the perimeter of his land, their faces obscured by shadows, their eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. They didn't speak, they didn't move, they just watched. The rancher couldn't help but feel the weight of their gaze, as though they were silently measuring him, calculating something he couldn't fathom. There were no words, no interaction, just the presence of these strange figures lurking at the edges of his property. It unsettled him to his core. His usual sense of security was slipping away, and the quiet nights he once took for granted were now filled with an undercurrent of tension. He tried to confront one of them, but each time he approached, they would vanish into the trees, as if they were never there at all. The rancher began to realize that these weren't random wanderers. They were watching him, and they were waiting for something. It wasn't just the strangers on the edge of his land that troubled him, it was the feeling of being hunted. At night, when the fire burned low and the stars filled the sky, he would hear footsteps outside his cabin, faint but unmistakable. He would rush to the door, rifle in hand, but there was never anyone there. The sound would disappear as quickly as it had come. His every move felt scrutinized, like someone was always one step behind him. He had no idea who these people were, but he knew one thing for sure: they weren't here by chance. They were searching for something, and the rancher feared they were getting closer to what they wanted. The growing sense of danger reached a boiling point one afternoon when the rancher caught sight of a group of them standing near his barn. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, their faces unreadable. The rancher's heart raced as he tried to keep his composure. He knew why they were here. They were after the amulet. His chest tightened at the thought. He had tried to ignore it, tried to push the fear aside, but now there was no denying it. These strangers had not come to trade or ask for help. They had come for the one thing he had sworn to protect. The amulet was no longer just a symbol of ancient power. It was a target, and the rancher was its keeper. His mind raced as he thought about what to do. The amulet had been with him every moment since the elder had given it to him, and it had felt like an anchor in a world that was growing increasingly unstable. But now it felt like a curse. He couldn't escape the knowledge that the amulet was the reason for everything that was happening: the warriors, the visions, and now these mysterious figures. The rancher knew that he couldn't keep it out in the open any longer. They would come for it, and when they did, they wouldn't stop until they had it in their possession. He had no idea what they would do if they succeeded, but it didn't take much imagination to know it would be something terrible. The tension in the air was suffocating as the rancher weighed his options. He had to hide the amulet. There was no other choice, but where? The land was vast and no place felt truly safe. He thought about the old barn, the one that had been unused for years, its walls thick with dust and cobwebs. It was a place no one would think to look. He had to act quickly, before the strangers found him, or, worse, the amulet. With shaky hands, he took the amulet from around his neck and wrapped it carefully in a cloth. He didn't know how to protect it, but he knew it had to be hidden from sight, from prying eyes, and from whatever dark forces were after it. As the rancher made his way toward the barn, the weight of the amulet in his pocket felt unbearable. Each step seemed louder than the last, the quiet of the land now filled with an unspoken urgency. He reached the barn and pushed open the creaky door, the smell of old wood and hay filling his nostrils. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the dim interior. He found a loose floorboard near the corner, one that had been weathered with age and time. It was a perfect hiding spot, or so he hoped. He carefully lifted the floorboard and placed the amulet beneath it, covering it quickly and praying that no one would find it. It was the only place that felt safe, though he knew deep down that it wasn't truly hidden from the forces that were now closing in on him as he stood there. The weight of the amulet buried deep beneath the floorboards. The rancher couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before the strangers returned. They were relentless, and their presence on his land was no coincidence. They knew he had the amulet, and they would stop at nothing to get it. The rancher's heart raced as he stepped back, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. He felt the eyes of the world on him, as though the land itself were conspiring against him. And in that moment, he realized that this was only the beginning. The amulet had set something into motion, and there was no way to stop it now. Oh, ChatGPT. The rancher could no longer shake the feeling that there was more to the girl than met the eye. After hiding the amulet, he decided to find out who she truly was. His first step was to revisit the night she had come to his door, searching for any clue, any hint that might shed light on her origins. He retraced his steps, checking the fields, where he had first seen her, but found nothing unusual. However, his instincts told him that she had left behind something, a trace of her past, something that might explain why she had come to him. Over the next few days, the rancher spoke to anyone who might know about the girl. He asked around the nearby town, but most people seemed to have never seen her yet. He caught whispers in the wind, rumors of a forgotten lineage, a bloodline tied to the old ways of the land. Then, one evening as he was returning from the town, he encountered an old man at the edge of the forest. The man was dressed in worn leather and carried the quiet weight of age, his face marked by the years and the secrets he carried. The rancher approached him cautiously, and without much preamble, he asked, "Do you know anything about the girl who came to my ranch?" The old man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was silence between them. "She is not just any girl," the old man said slowly, his voice low and deliberate. "She is from a bloodline that has guarded these lands for generations, powerful warriors, defenders of a way of life that most have forgotten." The rancher's heart skipped. This was no ordinary traveler, no mere wanderer. The old man told him stories of the girl's ancestors, warriors who had once led tribes across the land, men and women who fought to protect their people from invaders and conquerors. But there was more. The rancher learned that this bloodline had not only defended the land, but also held knowledge of ancient powers, rituals and artifacts that had the ability to change the course of history. The girl, he explained, had been chosen by her people to carry on this legacy, though she did not yet fully understand her role. Her arrival on the ranch was no accident. She was not a lost soul seeking food and shelter. She had come for a reason, a purpose that tied her fate to the very land the rancher worked. As the rancher absorbed this new information, a deeper mystery began to unfold before him. The girl wasn't just a link to the past, she was a key to something far greater, something that had been set in motion long before she had appeared at his door. She was part of a war that had been quietly raging in the shadows for centuries, a war that involved the balance of power between the old world and the new. This war had long been kept hidden from the eyes of the world, fought in the silence of forests and the darkness of night. The rancher felt a shiver run down his spine. He realized now that the girl was not just important for the protection of the amulet, she was crucial to something far more dangerous, far more ancient than anything he had ever imagined. The more the rancher learned, the clearer it became that he had unknowingly become entangled in this war. His small ranch, his quiet life, had been an illusion. The girl's appearance had been the catalyst that brought him into the fold of an ancient struggle. He now understood that the amulet, the warriors, the girl, of everything was connected to a power that transcended the mundane world he had known. He could no longer remain a passive observer. He had been pulled into a conflict that had been unfolding for generations, and it was only a matter of time before the true scope of the danger would reveal itself. The rancher's life, once so simple, had been irrevocably altered, and he could feel the weight of his new reality bearing down on him. The secrets of the girl were now his, and with them came a responsibility that he wasn't sure he could bear. ChatGPT. The rancher woke suddenly, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. The room around him was still bathed in the dim light of the early morning. He had just experienced a dream that felt far too real to be mere fantasy. In the dream, he saw the girl again, standing in the middle of a vast, ancient landscape, her eyes glowing with an ethereal light. She looked at him, her gaze intense, almost knowing. Without speaking, she gestured for him to follow her. He felt an inexplicable pull toward her, as though something deep within him recognized her, as if they were bound by a connection that transcended time. As he moved closer to her, she reached out, her hand brushing his arm, sending a chill through his body. And then, in a voice that seemed to echo inside his very soul, she spoke. "You are one of us," she said, her voice carrying an ancient, with wisdom. "You were always meant to protect the balance. The blood that runs through your veins is tied to the forces that govern the world. The amulet you carry is not just a token of power, it is a key to a world hidden from the eyes of men. Your purpose is far greater than you understand." The rancher stood frozen in the dream, his mind racing to comprehend her words. He had never considered himself anything special. He was just a rancher, a man who worked the land, not someone destined for greatness. But now, hearing her speak of ancient bloodlines and a greater purpose, he felt a shift within him. Something was awakening, something he hadn't known was dormant inside him. As the dream continued, the landscape around them began to change. The ground cracked open, and ancient symbols appeared in the air, glowing with an ominous light. The girl moved toward the center of the symbols, and the rancher followed, unable to resist. The air grew thick with power, a raw energy that surged through him, almost overwhelming him. He could feel the connection between them, a bond forged by the same blood that ran through her veins, a bloodline that had been passed down through generations. The amulet that hung around his neck pulsed in response, its power resonating with the symbols in the air. It was as if the amulet was alive, reacting to something deep within the earth itself. The rancher's body trembled as he realized the truth. He was not just a keeper of the amulet, he was part of the very force that had created it. The girl's voice returned, cutting through the swirling energy around them. "The balance is in danger," she said, her words filled with urgency. "The forces that seek to control the power of the amulet will stop at nothing. They will use it to tear apart the world as we know it. The Ancient Ones chose you because your bloodline holds the key to stopping them. The rancher felt the weight of her words press down on him like a stone. He wasn't just involved in some battle for an artifact. He was part of a war that had been waged for centuries. A war that threatened to unravel the very fabric of the world. He'd always thought his life was simple. He worked, he lived, he kept to himself. But now, it seemed he was caught in the middle of something far greater. Something far more dangerous. As the dream faded and the world around him began to dissolve, the rancher was left with a sense of foreboding. He woke with a start, gasping for breath, his mind reeling from the vividness of the dream. It felt like a warning, a message that he could not ignore. He sat up in his bed, his heart still racing, as the weight of what he had learned settled. Over him, the girl's revelation had shattered everything he had known about his life. He wasn't just a simple rancher, he was part of something far older, far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. The amulet was the key, but the true nature of its power and the dangers it posed was still unclear. He had to prepare, but was he ready for the responsibility that had been thrust upon him? The amulet was the key, but the true nature of its power and the dangers it posed was still unclear. He had to prepare, but was he ready for the responsibility that had been thrust upon him? As the sun rose, casting its light over the land, the rancher stood, knowing that the time to act was fast approaching. The world he had known was gone, and now he had to face whatever came next. The night was quiet, but the rancher could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. He had never been one to fear the unknown, but tonight something felt different. The wind had picked up, and the usual chorus of nocturnal creatures had fallen silent. As he stood at the edge of his porch peering into the darkness, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He could hear footsteps too many to be a random passerby. His instincts kicked in, and his hand went to the rifle resting by his side. He wasn't sure who was out there, but he knew one thing for certain: they were after the amulet. In the distance, shadowy figures moved like ghosts, their presence more unnerving than any animal he had encountered before. They were here, within moments. The silence of the night was shattered by the sound of boots crunching through the gravel. The rancher's heart raced as figures emerged from the shadows surrounding his home. Their faces were obscured, their intentions clear. The leader stepped forward, a tall figure with an air of authority that sent a chill down the rancher's spine. "Hand over the amulet," the man demanded, his voice cold and unwavering. The rancher tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes scanning the figures surrounding him. These were no ordinary thieves. They were organized, trained mercenaries, perhaps hired by the same dark forces the elder had warned him about. The rancher could feel the weight of the amulet around his neck, its power both a blessing and a curse. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the night, and the air was filled with the sound of galloping horses. From the forest, the warriors appeared as shadows, their faces hardened with resolve. They didn't hesitate. The battle erupted in an instant. The rancher fired a warning shot, but the real fight was just beginning. The warriors were swift and deadly, their movements fluid and calculated. They fought with a ferocity that could only come from a deep-rooted connection to the land and its ancient powers. The rancher stood alongside them, his rifle now in his hands as he fired with precision. Foresters retaliated, their weapons clashing with the warriors in a chaotic, violent ballet. Each swing of a sword, each crack of a bullet, was a dance of survival, a fight to protect the amulet and all it represented. But as the battle raged on, the rancher couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This fight, though, felt too easy. The foresters, though skilled, weren't the real threat. They were a distraction, he realized, a ploy to keep them occupied while something far worse was drawing near. In the midst of the chaos, the rancher caught a glimpse of something. Far beyond the battlefield, something dark and vast, looming on the horizon. A cold, unnatural wind swept over the land, and the earth seemed to tremble beneath his feet. The warriors around him faltered for a moment, their faces betraying a flicker of fear. They had sensed it too. The battle wasn't the real war, it was only the beginning. Just as the last of the foresters were driven away, the rancher and the warriors stood together, their breaths heavy in the cool night air. The smell of smoke and blood lingered in the air, but their victory felt hollow. They knew that this was not the end. Something far more sinister was coming, something that would require more than just strength and skill to defeat. The rancher looked at the amulet, the one thing they had fought to protect, and realized that it was not just a symbol of power, it was a beacon, calling to something much darker. The true enemy was near, and this battle, though hard one, was only a prelude to the storm that was about to break ChatGPT-GC. The rancher's mind was reeling from the events of the night before. The battle had been won, but the sense of unease remained. There was something more to the attackers, something deeper, darker that he couldn't fully comprehend. As he sat by the fire the next morning, the weight of the amulet heavy around his neck, he decided to confront the girl. She had always been an enigma, but now it was clear she held the answers he sought. He found her in the barn, sitting silently on a pile of hay, her expression unreadable. Without wasting time, he asked the question that had been gnawing at him for days. Who are you really? And why are they after the amulet? Her eyes, once filled with innocence, now carried the burden of centuries. She stood slowly, her gaze unwavering as she met the rancher's eyes. "I have known this day would come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am not just a girl who wandered into your life. I am a guardian, chosen to protect the balance between the worlds, between the old and the new. The amulet you hold is not just an artifact. It is the key to maintaining that balance." The rancher stood frozen, the gravity of her words settling over him like a dark cloud. He had known that the amulet was important, but this was far beyond anything he had imagined. She continued, her voice growing firmer. "The attacks, the people who came for it, they are part of a faction that seeks to disrupt that balance. They are an ancient order, working in the shadows for centuries. They believe that by controlling the amulet they can tip the scales in their favor, unleashing chaos and war between the worlds. Their goal is power, and they will stop at nothing to achieve it. I am tied to them more closely than you know. They believe I hold the key to their victory, but I will never let them succeed." The rancher's heart raced as the realization hit him. The girl was not just an innocent bystander. She was a key figure in a much larger, more dangerous struggle. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. The warriors, the amulet, the vision Zit was all connected to this faction and to the girl standing before him. She was both their target and their protector, the last line of defense against their plans. "But why come to me?" the rancher asked, his voice strained with confusion. "Why me? I'm just a man on a ranch." The girl met his gaze with sorrowful eyes. "You are part of this, whether you want to be or not. You are descended from those who fought to protect the balance in the past. Your bloodline is tied to mine, and that makes you a protector of the amulet. You were always meant to play this part, though I wish I could have shielded you from it." As the rancher grappled with this revelation, a chilling thought began to surface. He had known something was off, but now the truth was clearer than ever. The true enemy, the one behind all of this, was closer than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just some distant organization or force. It was someone from within. The girl's words cut through the air, confirming what he feared most. The leader of the faction, he is someone you trust. He has been pulling the strings from the very beginning, manipulating everything that has happened. He is the one who wants the amulet, and he will stop at nothing to take it from you. He is closer to you than you realized. A cold wave of dread washed over the rancher as the truth sank in. The girl's words echoed in his mind, and in that moment he understood. The rancher had been betrayed not by strangers, but by someone he had trusted. Someone who had been with him all along, pulling him deeper into the web of this ancient conflict. The realization was like a punch to the gut, and as the rancher, it stood there, the weight of the coming storm pressed down on him. The true battle had not yet begun, and the enemy was already inside his walls. The rancher stood at the edge of the cliff, his heart pounding in his chest as the weight of his decision bore down on him. In his hand, the amulet pulsed with an energy that felt both ancient and alive, as if it were calling to him, urging him to make the right choice. The battlefield had been left behind, and now it was time for him to decide if he continued to fight for the balance that had been entrusted to him, or did he give up the amulet to the very forces that sought to destroy it. He could feel the eyes of the girl on him, her presence a constant reminder of the connection they shared, of the responsibility that had been placed upon his shoulders. But as the wind howled around him, the rancher couldn't escape the truth. No matter which path he chose, destruction seemed inevitable. The world had been thrown into chaos since he had first received the amulet. The warriors had fought beside him, and the girl had revealed her true nature. But all of it had been in the name of protecting something that seemed too powerful to control. The faction he had fought so hard against had only been a small part of a much larger war, one that spanned generations and involved forces beyond human understanding. The rancher had thought he was merely a man, a simple rancher, who had stumbled into something far greater than himself. But now, he realized that he was not just a passive player in this war. He was part of it, and the choices he made would determine the fate of the world's dot. He thought of the girl, who had trusted him with the amulet, who had placed her faith in him despite everything that had happened. She had been honest with him about the danger they faced, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more she hadn't told him. Could she be trusted? Was she truly a protector, or was she part of the very force he was fighting against? His mind raced with the possibilities, but there was no time to question her now. The decision had to be made, and it had to be made quickly. His thoughts turned to the future. If he kept the amulet, the war would never end. The faction would always be hunting it, and he would always be caught in the middle. But if he gave it up, if he handed it over to the enemy, what would become of the balance? Could he live with the consequences of surrendering something so powerful? The air seemed to grow heavier as the rancher's gaze shifted toward the horizon. The world felt different now, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He could hear the distant sound of thunder, and the sky darkened, as though nature itself was preparing for the final act. The rancher's fingers tightened around the amulet, and for a moment, he closed his eyes. What had he truly learned in this journey? That he was part of something much larger than he could ever comprehend. That the choices he made were never his alone, but were tied to the fate of worlds. The tension built inside him, twisting like a knot, until it felt like the very ground beneath him might give way. The choice was impossible, but the time to make it had come. The rancher was no longer just a man with a rifle and a piece of land. He was a protector, a key figure in an ancient war, and his decision would decide whether the balance between the worlds lived or died. As the moment stretched on, the rancher's thoughts turned to his future. If he kept the amulet, he would have to fight for the rest of his life, always looking over his shoulder, always running from the shadows that sought to destroy him and everything he held dear. But if he gave it up, he would lose more than just the amulet. He would lose the very essence of his soul. The choice felt impossible. He couldn't have both peace and security. He couldn't protect the world and keep it from falling apart. But he knew, deep down, that there was no other choice. He would make the decision that had to be made, no matter the cost. He was ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. ChatGPT GC. The battlefield was a storm of chaos, with the winds howling and the ground shaking beneath the clashing forces. On one side stood the warriors, the girl by the ranchers side, each one fighting with everything they had to protect the balance between the worlds. On the other, the faction, their enemies, driven by a lust for power, sought the amulet that could tip the scales in their favor. The rancher's heart pounded as he stood at the center of it all, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. This was the moment he had feared, the moment where everything he had fought for would either fall apart or be saved. He gripped the amulet tightly, its power now a part of him, a force he could no longer deny. The time had come to use it, to finally unleash its true potential. The rancher knew that the amulet was more than just an artifact of power. It was a key to something deeper, something that held the secrets of the ancient conflict that had raged for centuries. As the battle raged around him, he could feel its energy coursing through his veins, its light growing brighter with each passing second. The warriors fought valiantly, but it was clear that they were outnumbered, and the tide was beginning to turn in favor of the faction. The girl, standing beside him, urged him to act. "You have to use it now," she shouted over the sounds of battle. "The amulet is the only way to end this, to stop them once and for all." The rancher didn't hesitate. He raised the amulet high, its light flaring as he activated its power, calling forth the force that had been hidden within it all along. For a moment, everything stood still. The world seemed to hold its breath as the energy from the amulet rippled out, sweeping across the battlefield in waves of raw power. The forces of the faction faltered, their strength waning as they felt the amulet's true power awaken. The rancher could see the fear in their eyes as they realized they had underestimated him, underestimated the power he had unlocked. The amulet, once a simple tool of protection, now revealed its true nature. It was not just a key to balance, but a force of creation and destruction, a weapon of unimaginable power. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the secret the girl had been keeping all along. The rancher was the last of his bloodline, and he had been chosen to wield it, to stop the faction from tipping the balance into chaos. As the amulet's energy spread, the rancher could feel the shift in the air. The ground cracked open, ancient symbols glowing beneath his feet as the power of the amulet aligned with the forces of nature itself. The battle raged on, but now, the faction was weakening. The rancher could hear the cries of their soldiers, their one certain victory slipping away as the power of the amulet crushed their will to fight. But the true battle was not in the physical realm. It was in the realm of balance itself. The rancher had to focus, had to remain connected to the amulet's power, to control it and use it wisely. His hands trembled as the energy surged through him, but he knew that this was the moment that would define the outcome of the war. With a final surge of energy, the rancher unleashed the full power of the amulet, the force of it so immense that it seemed to split the very air. The ground shook as a massive wave of energy swept across the battlefield, striking the faction's forces with a blinding light. Their soldiers crumbled under its force, unable to withstand the power of the amulet. As the light faded and the dust settled, the battlefield fell silent. The rancher stood, breathing heavily, his body trembling with exhaustion. The girl stepped forward, her eyes filled with both relief and sadness. The war was over. The faction had been defeated, their plans shattered, but the cost had been high, and the balance that had been restored would never be the same. The rancher knew that the amulet had revealed its final secret, that true power came not from domination, but from the ability to protect and preserve the balance, no matter the personal cost. The battle was won, but the journey had changed him forever. The rancher stood alone on the battlefield, the echoes of the final battle still ringing in his ears. His body was battered, his spirit weary, but there was a sense of peace settling over him, a peace he hadn't felt in years. The war was over, the faction defeated, and the balance between the worlds had been restored. But as he looked down at the amulet still hanging around his neck, he knew that the final choice lay before him. He had fought for something greater than himself, something that had changed the course of history. Now, with the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, he had to decide. Was it time to walk away and live the life he had once known, or would he remain a protector, bound to the legacy of his bloodline? The choice wasn't easy, but it was his to make. For a long time, the rancher had questioned his purpose. He had never sought out the war, never asked to be a part of something so vast, so ancient. He had simply been a man, a rancher, living a quiet life. but that life had been forever altered by the arrival of the girl and the amulet. He had been thrust into a conflict that spanned generations, and in the end, he had become a key figure in an ancient war that had shaped the fate of the world. Now, standing in the aftermath, he realized that he had found a new sense of self, not as a simple man of the land, but as a protector of something far greater. The choice to save his own life was tempting, but he knew that his destiny was tied to something larger than personal comfort. The rancher closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the weight of everything he had learned to wash over him. The girl, the amulet, the battles, they had all been part of a larger plan, a plan that he was now a part of. The mystery that had once consumed him was finally resolved. The girl was not just a wanderer, but a guardian, and the amulet was more than just a weapon. It was the key to maintaining the balance between the worlds. The rancher's role in all of this had been to protect that balance, even at great personal cost. But now, as he stood at the crossroads, he understood that the mission had been fulfilled. He had done what was required of him. The world would continue, and he had played his part in ensuring that it would survive. Yet, as much as he had come to terms with his mission, the future remained uncertain. What would come next? Would the balance hold, or would there be other forces, other battles waiting on the horizon? The rancher had no answers, only a deep understanding that his journey had been about more than just defeating the enemy. It had been about discovering his true purpose and accepting the responsibility that came with it. The world had changed, and so had he. As the sun began to set on the horizon, the rancher took one last look at the land he had once called home. His mission was complete, but the future was still unwritten. What legacy would he leave behind? Only time would tell. As the rancher walked away from the battlefield, the weight of the amulet no longer felt heavy. It was a part of him now, not just a symbol of the past, but a reminder of what he had fought for. His name would not be forgotten, nor would the sacrifices he had made. The legacy of the rancher, the protector of the balance, would live on in the stories passed down through generations. The world had been saved, but it was not the end. The beginning of a new era had been set into motion, and as the rancher disappeared into the distance, there was a sense that his story was not just his own, it was a part of something much bigger, a legacy that would continue to shape the world long after he was gone. And the world slowly began to heal. The echoes of the Great War faded into memory, and the balance between the worlds, though fragile, remained intact. The rancher's name was spoken in whispers, passed down through the generations as a legend, a protector who had fought to preserve the delicate harmony between the realms. Yet, in the quiet corners of the world, there were still those who remembered the power of the amulet, who had heard the stories of the battle, and who sought to understand the true depth of what had been accomplished. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, a group of travelers arrived at the very same ranch where the battle had once been fought. Their eyes were full of determination, their expressions grave. They had heard the stories, of course, but there was something more, an ancient calling that had drawn them here. The land itself seemed to hum with energy, as if it remembered the struggles of the past. The travelers, led by a young woman with the same piercing eyes as the girl who had once been the rancher's ally, stood in awe of the place. There was a silence between them, a recognition that something significant had taken place here long ago. The young woman, known only as Leela, approached the dilapidated farmhouse, her gaze fixed on the spot where the rancher had once stood. Her hands clenched around a familiar object, a small worn amulet, nearly identical to the one the rancher had once carried. It was a relic, passed down through a bloodline, and it pulsed with a familiar energy. Lila had been told that her destiny, like the rancher's, was to protect the balance. She had been raised on the stories, on the teachings of the ancient warriors, but now, standing on the land that had borne witness to so much pain and sacrifice, she could feel that the time had come to make her own stand. As the wind picked up, Lila closed her eyes, feeling the energy of the land pulse beneath her feet. She could sense the lingering presence of the rancher, the weight of his legacy. It was as if the very earth remembered his struggle and the choices he had made. But now, with the world at peace for the moment, there were new challenges on the horizon. She knew the faction that had once sought the amulet had not been entirely vanquished. Their influence still lurked in the shadows, and though the leader had fallen, there were still those who sought to claim the power of the amulet for themselves. The cycle, she feared, was not yet broken. Lila turned to the others, her companions, who stood watching with a mix of reverence and apprehension. They had followed her here, believing in the stories of the rancher's victory and the power of the amulet. But now, the truth was clear to her. The battle was never truly over. The forces of darkness were merely waiting for the right moment to strike again. She had come to this place not just to honor the rancher's legacy, but to prepare for the inevitable. There would be more battles, more tests of strength and will. She could feel it deep in her bones. A low rumble of thunder broke the stillness, and Lila looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The storm was coming, both in the sky and in the world around her. She turned to her companions, her voice steady but firm. "We must be ready," she said, her eyes shining with a resolve that mirrored the rancher's. "The war is not over. The amulet's power is still a threat, and there will be others who come after it. We will stand together, as he did, and we will fight to protect the balance. The winds picked up again, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of change. Lila's grip on the amulet tightened, the energy within it swirling in response to the storm. She could feel the weight of her responsibility pressing on her shoulders, but she was not afraid. She knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she was not alone. The rancher's spirit lingered in the land, in the very air they breathed, and his legacy was one she would carry forward. The battle might be far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Lila and her companions made their way toward the forest, toward the unknown. The land, though scarred by the past, was still alive with possibility. The rancher's legacy had not just been about fighting, it had been about protecting, about ensuring that the balance between the worlds would remain intact for future generations. And now, it was her turn to carry that torch. As the storm raged around them, they walked into the future, not knowing what challenges lay ahead, but knowing that the fight for balance was a never-ending one. The story of the rancher was not over, it was only just beginning.